Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our mythic journey where ancient stories are not only retold, but become gentle rhythms that guide you softly toward sleep. If you're lying in bed, eyes halfway closed, or simply relaxing after a long day, let this narration carry you backward through time, past the clouds, past the night sky, to the very first days of ancient Greece. In today's episode, we'll walk beside one of the greatest heroes in all Western mythology, Hercules, the son of Zeus, the warrior who lived through tragedy, sought redemption, and left behind 12 immortal labors. But before Hercules became a legend, before his name was etched into the heavens, his story began somewhere far above on Mount Olympus, where the gods commanded the workings of the world. So take a slow breath, let your shoulders soften, and let us begin. High above, higher than any human eye could ever reach, stood a mountain that pierced the sky. The Greeks called it Olympus, home of the gods. That night, the summit of Olympus did not blaze with storm or fury. Instead, layers of dark clouds drifted slowly around its peak like folds of soft silk, circling, overlapping, parting. Again, each movement illuminated from within by a muted amber glow, as though the mountain itself were breathing light rather than fire. The air was still. Not the stillness of emptiness, but the stillness of immense presence. A silence so deep that even thunder learned to move gently within it. At the heart of Olympus stood the great hall of the gods, vast beyond human scale. Towering white columns rose from the polished stone floor, their surfaces smooth as bone, pale as moonlight, stretching upward until they vanished into shadow, as if they were not meant to be fully seen by mortal eyes. Between them hung an endless twilight, neither day nor night, but a suspended hour where time itself seemed reluctant to pass. Thunder rolled through the hall, not as a roar, but as a low rhythmic murmur, deep and steady, like the breathing of the world itself. It echoed along the columns, slid across the marble floor, and dissolved somewhere far above, where ceiling and sky were indistinguishable. At the far end of the hall, upon a radiant throne of gold that seemed less forged than summoned, sat Zeus, king of the gods, bearer of lightning, the will that held the sky apart from the earth. The throne shimmered softly, not with ostentation, but with a restrained brilliance, as though it knew no rival existed. Lightning did not strike from Zeus's hand. It rested there, coiled and patient, a reminder that power did not need to announce itself. Zeus sat in silence, his gaze fixed not on Olympus, but far below toward the fragile world of mortals. From that height, cities were no more than faint glimmers. Battles were brief sparks. Lives rose and vanished like mist at dawn. And yet it was that world, small, fleeting, endlessly vulnerable, that held his attention. For the gods did not watch mortals out of kindness alone, nor out of cruelty. They watched because within those brief lives burned something the gods themselves lacked: the weight of consequence, the sharp edge of choice, the courage to act without certainty of immortality. That night, Olympus seemed to lean inward, as though listening. The clouds tightened their slow orbit. The thunder softened further. And even the immortal hall felt expectant. For somewhere below, a fate shaped by thunder and flesh alike was unfolding, a life born from divine power, yet destined to suffer as a human suffers, to fall as humans fall, and to rise only through pain, endurance, and choice. Zeus did not speak. He did not need to. The silence itself was already an omen. On Olympus, nothing ever happened by accident. And that night, beneath silk-like clouds and patient thunder, the world was being prepared for the arrival of a destiny that would one day shake both gods and men. His eyes, deep as the chasms of the sky, followed the lands of Greece, lands torn apart by chaos. Down there, humans trembled each night because of monsters prowling from the mountains. Hybrid creatures born from the age of primordial darkness, and bloodthirsty armies spreading terror wherever they marched. Zeus knew, not as a sudden revelation, but as a pressure that had been building for ages. The balance between gods and mortals, once held by ritual fear and reverence, was thinning like a veil worn too long beneath the sun. Mortals were forgetting the old boundaries. Kings challenged fate. Heroes trusted strength more than wisdom, and the gods themselves, distant and divided, no longer stepped into the world with one will. If nothing changed, Zeus saw what would follow. Not a single catastrophe, but a slow unraveling. Order would fracture, justice would lose its weight, and chaos, not the wild chaos of creation, but the barren chaos of meaninglessness, would prevail. So in that glowing hall, amidst lightning restrained and marble steeped in shadow, Zeus made a decision that would ripple across centuries. Not a decree, not a thunderbolt, but a birth. He would not send another god down to rule by fear, nor would he erase humanity and begin again. Instead, he would create a bridge, a being who carried both heights and limits within the same blood. A hero, half god, half mortal, strong enough to confront monsters born of chaos, yet vulnerable enough to suffer consequence, guilt, and loss. A being who would not merely overpower the world, but endure it. This hero would not restore balance by command. He would restore it by trial, but even Zeus could not shape such a fate alone. Divinity could grant power, but not grounding. For that, he needed mortality, not just any mortal, but a soul capable of bearing greatness without breaking. And so, Zeus turned his gaze toward the human world, toward a lineage untouched by treachery, toward a woman whose strength lay not in weapons, but in loyalty, courage, and endurance. Her name was Alcmene. Alcmene was no queen of vast dominions, no sorceress whispering to the gods. She was noble by blood, descended from Perseus, but more importantly, noble in spirit, faithful to her husband Amphitryon, unyielding in the face of fear. A woman whose virtue was not innocence, but resolve. Zeus did not choose her lightly. He saw in Alcmene a paradox he needed for his design, a mortal strong enough to survive divine interference, yet human enough to love to grieve and to raise a child bound for suffering. On the night Zeus descended, he did not come in thunder. He did not reveal his true form. He came disguised as Amphitryon himself, wearing the familiar face of the man Alcmene trusted, stretching the night unnaturally long, as though time itself paused to witness the moment. This was not seduction born of desire alone. It was destiny executed through deception, and even Zeus knew the cost would one day be paid. From that union, a life was conceived that would never belong fully to either world. A child who would inherit divine strength without divine immunity. A child who would be hated by Hera, tested by monsters broken by his own hands, and forced to atone for crimes born not of malice, but of madness and fate. That night, Olympus remained silent. The clouds continued their slow orbit. Thunder did not speak, but the world below had already changed. For with Alcmene, Zeus had not merely chosen a woman, he had chosen suffering as the price of salvation. And from that choice, the long and terrible glory of Hercules began. In the city of Thebes lived a woman as gentle as the moon's first light, Alcmene, descendant of Perseus, the hero who once cut off Medusa's head. She was beautiful, yes, but Zeus valued her for something deeper, a pure and unwavering kindness. While her husband Amphitryon was away at war, Zeus took on the exact form of that husband and visited her. From that night, a new life was conceived carrying half the blood of Zeus himself. This child was the one Zeus placed his greatest hopes upon, a future king, a bringer of peace, a hero all of Greece would one day look up to. But Zeus forgot one thing. Hera, the most powerful goddess of Olympus and his wife, was watching. Through countless affairs and countless illegitimate children, she had swallowed her anger. But this time, she could not. Because Zeus did not just commit adultery, he proclaimed that the firstborn descendant of Perseus would be granted dominion over all of Greece, and Hera knew exactly whom he meant. Hera was the goddess of marriage, family, and rightful authority. Anyone who insulted her god or mortal paid dearly. She didn't need storms or thunder. She only needed time. At the moment Alcmene went into labor, Hera cast a spell to delay the birth. Meanwhile, she accelerated the labor of another woman who was also carrying a child of Perseus's bloodline. Thus Eurystheus, a frail, timid infant, was born just a few seconds before Hercules. Only a few seconds. But a few seconds were enough to seal the fate of a hero, because Zeus had sworn with his own voice. The one born first of Perseus's line shall be granted the right to rule. Zeus realized what Hera had done, but it was too late. Even the king of the gods cannot break an oath sworn upon the heavens. From that moment, Eurystheus became heir to the throne, while Hercules, born strong-born to save mortals, was stripped of that destiny, and Hera smiled in the shadows. The birth of Hercules. When Hercules was born, the sky above Greece brightened. People said that a silent bolt of lightning slid across the heavens, a quiet greeting from Zeus. Hercules grew up with eyes as clear as autumn skies. But deep within them lay something else, as if he could sense the destiny waiting ahead of him. Zeus watched his son's every step with pride and helplessness. Hera did not. To her, the child was a living symbol of betrayal. And from the moment Hercules let out his first cry, Hera never stopped trying to destroy him. Olympus watched from above, while the boy who lost his birthright by mere seconds continued to grow unaware of the horrors awaiting him. But even though the gods tried to dictate his fate, Hercules would one day choose his own path. He would grow Fightfall atone and become a timeless symbol. And it all began the moment Hera altered the timing of two births. That was the beginning of tragedy, and the beginning of a legend. From the moment he was a child, Hercules was different. While other children were still learning how to run, stumbling, laughing, scraping their knees on dust and stone, Hercules moved with a different weight upon the ground. Not clumsy, not rushed, but heavy in a way that felt deliberate, as though gravity itself recognized him and adjusted its grip. Before his body had fully grown, strength had already settled into his limbs. He lifted stones meant for boundary walls, not toys stones that took two grown men to roll aside, and raised them without strain, without spectacle, as if such effort required no more thought than breathing. There was no triumph in his face, no pride in the act, only a quiet focus, the calm of a child who did not yet know that what came naturally to him was terrifying to others. When other children practiced tossing wooden balls, counting steps, learning distance and restraint, Hercules reached instinctively for heavier things. Flat stones torn from the hillside, broken fragments of fallen columns. He hurled them not in anger, but in curiosity, testing the arc of the sky, the patience of the horizon. The stones vanished into distance so vast that no one could agree where they landed. Shepherds argued. Farmers shaded their eyes and guessed. Even seasoned warriors fell silent, for they understood what the children did not. This was not strength that could be taught. It was strength that demanded consequence. People began to whisper, not loudly, not openly, but with the caution reserved for omens. Hercules doesn't walk like a child, they said. He walks as if the earth itself moves aside to give him room. And it was true. Animals shifted away before he reached them. Dogs stopped barking. Horses grew uneasy, sensing something older than instinct. There was a pressure around the boy, subtle but constant, as though the world recognized in him a force it had encountered before, in storms and earthquakes, in the fall of great trees. His foster father Amphitryon saw it clearly. A famed general hardened by campaigns and bloodshed, Amphitryon had spent his life learning one essential truth. Raw power, if left unshaped, destroys indiscriminately. To the untrained eye, Hercules was a wonder. To Amphitryon he was a danger, not because the boy was cruel, but because he was innocent. Strength without restraint, force without understanding, is not heroism. It is catastrophe waiting for a moment of weakness. So Amphitryon did not praise the boy's feats. He did not encourage the whispers. Instead, he imposed discipline. He taught Hercules how to stand before he taught him how to strike, how to hold still, how to listen, how to feel the moment just before action, the fragile space where choice exists. Weapons were introduced slowly, cautiously. A wooden club before iron, a shield before a sword. Not to sharpen aggression, but to teach responsibility. Yet even as Amphitryon trained the body, something else was already stirring beneath the surface, a temper too vast for a child's frame, a storm of emotion with no name yet. For Hercules did not only inherit divine strength, he inherited the tension of two worlds pulling at the same soul, the mortal desire to belong, and the God-born impulse to overwhelm. Amphitryon sensed it, though he could not fully explain it. He knew only this: if this strength was not guided by wisdom, it would one day turn inward or outward and shatter everything it touched. The child lifted stones. The boy threw mountains into the distance. But the man he would become was already being shaped by a quieter, darker truth, that the greatest danger Hercules would ever face was not a monster, not a giant, not a beast born of myth, but the power within himself, still untested, still unnamed, waiting for the moment when innocence would no longer be enough. So Hercules was sent to study under the greatest masters of Greece: Eurytos, master of archery; Autolycus, expert in wrestling and combat; Chiron, the immortal centaur, teacher of wisdom and ethics; Linus, the master of music, who taught him the lyre. Hercules learned quickly sometimes, frighteningly quickly. What took others weeks to grasp, he absorbed in days. What demanded repetition and patience from ordinary children, he mastered almost by instinct. He was stronger than everyone, faster than everyone. But beneath that brilliance lay something far less easily shaped. He was also angrier than everyone. Not the loud, careless anger of spoiled youth, but a dense, coiled force compressed behind silence. An anger that did not flare often, but when it did, it struck like lightning with no warning. And that anger would soon lead to tragedy. The day the storm broke. It was a calm morning, the kind of morning that seems designed to reassure the world that nothing terrible could happen. Soft sunlight filtered through the white stone columns of the music chamber, dust motes drifting lazily in the air like floating embers. Outside, olive trees stood motionless. Even the birds sang gently, as if the day itself were holding its breath. Inside, Linus sat across from Hercules, a gentleman, a poet, a musician whose life had been shaped not by battle, but by rhythm, harmony, and restraint. He held a lyre across his knees, its strings glimmering faintly in the light. Patiently, carefully, he showed Hercules where to place his fingers, how to press, how to release, how to let sound breathe instead of forcing it Not with strength, Linus said softly, with balance. But Hercules shifted uneasily. His hands were large, even then, his fingers thick with muscle rather than delicacy. They had been shaped for wooden swords, for war bows, pulled taut until they groaned for shields and clubs and stone. The lyre felt wrong in his grip, fragile, resisting him not with force, but with subtlety. Linus corrected him again, and again, not harshly, not cruelly, only with calm insistence. Slowly, he said, "Listen first, then play." Something inside Hercules tightened. To him, the strings felt like chains. The careful movements felt like restraint imposed from outside, not earned from within. Each correction scraped against a growing pressure, the sense that his nature itself was being denied. A string snapped. The sound cracked through the chamber, sharp, sudden, final. Linus startled. Hercules froze. For a heartbeat, the world balanced on silence. Then Linus spoke firm now, no longer gentle. "Control yourself." The words were meant as guidance. They landed as judgment. In that instant, the storm broke. Hercules rose, not shouting, not roaring, rising. The lyre was still in his hands. The instrument of harmony, of measured breath and ordered sound. He did not understand what he was doing until it was already done. The blow was swift, terrible, irreversible. Linus fell. The chamber went still. No thunder followed. No divine sign. Only the quiet horror of realization spreading through the room like cold. Hercules stood there. The lyre shattered his hands, trembling not from effort, but from the sudden knowledge that strength once released cannot be called back. He had not meant to kill, but intention did not matter anymore. This was the first blood on Hercules' path, not shed in battle, not against a monster, but against a teacher whose only crime was believing that beauty could tame power. From that day forward, Hercules was no longer simply a gifted child. He was a warning, a living proof of a truth the gods themselves feared. That raw strength without wisdom does not create heroes. It creates disasters, and the world quietly, inexorably, began to prepare him not for glory, but for atonement. The notes he plucked were harsh, off-key. Linus corrected him again and again with a teacher's earnest devotion, once, twice, a third time. And on the fourth, when his teacher's tone grew a bit sharper, Hercules snapped. No one knew what moved first, the boy or the lyre. But in the next heartbeat, Hercules stood up, lifted the instrument with his impossible strength, and brought it crashing down on Linus's head. Linus fell. He did not rise again. Silence filled the room, the kind of silence that freezes time. Though it was ruled an accident, though the boy was forgiven because of his youth, the death of Linus left a deep fracture in Hercules' soul. Witnesses whispered later, the boy didn't mean to kill. But in his eyes, we saw a storm curling into existence, and far above on Olympus Hera saw everything. There was no pity in her gaze, only calculation. This anger will one day destroy itself. The first battlefield. When Hercules grew older, destiny placed him on his first battlefield. Amphitryon, his foster father, led the army of Thebes against the savage Minyans. But in that brutal war, the great general fell. The death of the man who raised him ignited something fierce inside Hercules. He stepped forward, took command of the army, and under his hands, the battlefield changed. They said Hercules lifted a massive boulder to shield soldiers from a rain of arrows. They said he swung a wooden club and knocked down 3 warriors in a single strike. They said he charged into the enemy like a lion leaping from a mountain peak. The Minyans, once feared across the region, were utterly destroyed. When Hercules returned to Thebes, the people cheered as if the war god Ares himself had walked through their gates. King Creon, moved by Hercules' valor, gave him his daughter Megara in marriage. For a time, it was the happiest period of Hercules' life. Megara was gentle wise, and beside her, Hercules softened. They had 3 children together, and laughter filled their home each night. But far above, Hera watched, and to her that happiness was an insult, a slap to her divine pride. She had endured much from Zeus. But the idea that the bastard son of Zeus was now celebrated across all of Greece, she would not allow it. The night happiness ended. One quiet night, Hercules returned home after training. Thebes slept peacefully. The wind brushed softly against tiled roofs, but the door of his house was slightly open. Firelight flickered faintly inside. Something shifted in the shadows. Hercules called for Megara, but there was no reply. Then from the darkness, misshapen shadows emerged. They snarled. They clawed. They looked like creatures torn from a nightmare. In that instant, Hercules lost control. He fought as if the whole world had turned against him. The club rose. Screams tore the air. Bodies fell. And then Hera lifted her spell. The monsters vanished. On the floor lay Megara and their 3 children, lifeless, covered in blood. Hercules collapsed, gathering them into his arms. He called their names, but only silence answered. That night, the strongest hero in Greece killed his own family, not by choice, not by malice, but because Hera pushed madness into his mind until it tore out his heart. A moment that even the gods fell silent. Hercules stepped outside into the cold night. Thunder rumbled faintly across the sky. In his hands was the blood of everyone he loved. He lifted his face toward Olympus. No shouting, no curses, only a whisper. If I do not atone, then I do not deserve to live. In ancient Greece, the murder of one's own kin was the gravest of all sins. The Erinyes, the Furies goddesses of vengeance, would pursue a guilty soul to the ends of time, unless that soul found a way to cleanse its guilt. Hercules knew he could not run. He had to confront it. He had to cleanse himself. So he walked away from Thebes, away from his old life, away from the laughter of Megara, toward the temple of Delphi, where Apollo alone could reveal the path for the broken and the damned. That was the moment the 12 labors began. Hercules walked through the dusty dawn, the sun not yet risen. His shoulders had never felt heavier, not from strength, but from regret. Yet with each step he took, he moved closer toward destiny, to redeem himself through impossible trials and to become a legend beyond time. Hercules left the city of Thebes like a shadow. Behind him, the streets still slept in darkness. No lamps lit, no doors open, and the people who once hailed him as their savior had no idea that their hero had just slain his own family in a haze of madness. The earth beneath his feet was still darkened by the ashes of old battles, ashes not only of fallen enemies, but of promises broken and lives that would never return. The road stretched long and pale before him, a ribbon of dust cutting through the hills of Boeotia, still damp with the breath of early morning. The wind brushed gently across his shoulders, cool and fragrant, carrying the scent of grass stone and dawn. It was the kind of wind meant to comfort travelers, to remind them that the world continued to turn, that light always followed night. But not even the morning breeze could soothe the storm inside him. Hercules walked alone, not as a hero, not as a son of Zeus, but as a man hollowed out by his own hands. Along the long road toward Delphi, he said nothing. There was no prayer on his lips, no plea rising toward Olympus. He simply walked each step, heavy, deliberate, as if the ground itself were pulling him downward, drawing him deeper into the abyss that had opened in his heart. The weight he carried was invisible, yet it bent his back more than any burden he had ever lifted. It was not the weight of guilt alone, but the unbearable clarity that followed it, the moment when madness fades and memory returns in full merciless detail. At times he slowed. At times he stopped altogether. His great hand would tremble slightly as he lifted his gaze toward the sky, now fading from night into pale blue. The stars still lingered there, distant and indifferent, their cold light unchanged by human grief. They watched him as they always had. They did not accuse. They did not forgive. No one heard him whisper Megara's name. No one heard the way it broke in his throat, as if the sound itself refused to leave him intact. No one knew how deeply he missed the laughter of his children, that sudden unguarded joy that once filled the halls of his home, the echo of small footsteps, the careless warmth of ordinary days that only reveal their value once they are gone. Those memories came uninvited. They rose with every mile, with every breath, until the road itself seemed paved with ghosts. Hercules did not weep loudly. He did not cry out to the heavens. His grief was quieter than that pressed inward where it burned without flame. Delphi lay ahead, the navel of the world, where mortals dared to ask the gods what could not be answered by strength alone. He did not know what awaited him there: punishment, redemption, or a sentence worse than death. He only knew this: he could not remain where he was. He could not return. He could not undo what had been done. So he walked, not toward hope, not toward absolution, but toward judgment, because even a man born of thunder must one day stand still and listen to the truth spoken aloud. And as the sun slowly rose behind him, casting his long shadow forward along the road to Delphi, Hercules followed it step by step into a fate that would demand not his strength, but his soul. Only the earth, the wind, and the quiet darkness understood that Hercules carried a pain heavy enough to tear apart the heart of a god. Yet he kept walking, because he knew that pain was the only thing still keeping him alive. The sacred path to Delphi. Delphi was unlike any other place in the mortal world. It was not merely a city, nor simply a sanctuary built of stone. It was a threshold. The ancient Greeks believed that here, at the slopes of Mount Parnassus, the earth itself opened just enough for the voice of Apollo to rise from its depths, not shouted, not proclaimed, but breathed through the mouth of the oracle, carried on incense, silence, and fear. Delphi was a sacred crossroads, not of roads alone, but of destinies. A place where kings came disguised as beggars, where generals arrived triumphant and left trembling, where ordinary men asked questions they would never dare to speak anywhere else. It was said that Delphi marked the omphalos, the navel of the world, the point from which meaning radiated outward. And like any center, it demanded a price honesty without armor. By the time Hercules reached Delphi, the night had fully loosened its grip on the sky. The sun began to rise behind the jagged peaks of Mount Parnassus, slowly, reverently, as if even the light itself approached this place with caution. That first golden glow struck the white stone walls of the sanctuary and lingered there, turning marble into something almost alive. The temple did not merely reflect the morning, it seemed to absorb it, to drink in the light, until every surface shimmered, as though gilded by the gods themselves. Mist clung to the lower terraces, coiling around statues of forgotten heroes and long-dead priests. Laurel trees stirred softly in the breeze, their leaves whispering like pages of an unwritten fate. Somewhere higher up, a single bird, cried its call sharp and lonely against the vast silence. The stairway leading to the sanctuary was long and empty. Each step was worn smooth by centuries of feet, by pilgrims, by soldiers, by rulers, by mothers praying for sons, by men begging the gods to forgive what could not be undone. Hercules climbed slowly, not because his body was tired, it never was, but because his soul resisted what lay ahead. Tall columns rose on either side of the stairway, pale and immovable, like pillars of frozen light, holding the sky in place. They did not welcome him. They did not bar his way. They simply stood bearing silent witness. The air grew cooler as he ascended, carrying the scent of burning incense and crushed laurel. Every sound seemed distant now. The wind muted the world below, reduced to a memory. With each step, Hercules felt something unfamiliar tightening around his chest, not fear of death, but fear of being seen. Seen not as a hero, not as a son of Zeus, but as a man stripped of excuses. This was not a place where strength mattered. No monster could be slain here. No labor completed, no enemy defeated. Delphi demanded stillness. At the top of the stairway, the sanctuary opened before him, calm, radiant, severe. The entrance yawned dark beneath the shining stone, as if the temple itself were inhaling, waiting for him to step inside. Hercules paused. Behind him lay blood madness and irreversible loss. Before him lay a voice that could not be silenced, a truth that could not be wrestled into submission. And for the first time in his life, the greatest of heroes stood at the edge of a trial that could not be met with muscle or fury, only with surrender, only with the courage to listen. Greeting Hercules with a solemn, wordless presence. At the foot of the steps, Hercules knelt. His voice was soft, but each word fell to the ground like a weight. If I cannot change the past, then grant me the path to make it right. A faint breeze stirred, carrying the thin scent of incense. In that holy stillness, Hercules stepped inside. The oracle's distorted prophecy. Within the temple, Pythia, the oracle, sat upon her three-legged wooden seat, above the sacred fissure from which the breath of Apollo was said to rise. A mist curled around her silver hair. Her eyes were closed, her breathing steady, as though she had been waiting for Hercules for a very, very long time. He knelt before her, pressing his forehead to the cold stone floor. I seek a way to atone. Tell me what I must do. Slowly, Pythia opened her eyes. At that moment, a soft golden light spread across the stone floor like a thin veil of sunrise. Her lips parted and the prophecy began. But high above on Olympus, someone had been waiting for this exact moment. Hera. From the purple clouds around her, she lifted her hand, and a swirl of magic slipped into the temple, coiling around the oracle's breath, twisting the divine words at the very instant they were spoken. Pythia's voice echoed through the hall, but now it was no longer entirely Apollo. To atone, you must serve Eurystheus, king of Mycenae, for 12 years. Hercules froze. Eurystheus, the weak infant who had been born just seconds before him, thanks to Hera's trick. But Pythia was not finished. A second breath, brighter, purer, seemed to break through the last film of Hera's spell. This time, her voice rang clear, like light itself. And if you complete all the tasks given to you, Zeus will grant you immortality. The words pierced straight into Hercules' heart. Not because he longed for eternal life, but because he understood. To deserve to live at all, he would have to walk the hardest road imaginable. He bowed his head, a strange calm settling over him. Even if the prophecy had been twisted, even if Hera had laid traps everywhere, Hercules would accept it. The warning of the oracle. As he prepared to leave, the oracle called out softly, Hercules. The path you are about to walk will be unlike anything you have ever known. It will strip your strength, test your soul, and take from you those you love. But if you reach its end, you will no longer be mortal. Hercules said nothing. Her words did not make him proud, they made him feel small. Pythia continued, her voice slow and deep. Remember this: strength may slay monsters, but compassion is the only thing that can save you. When she finished, the mist around her faded as though it had never existed. Hercules bowed low in gratitude to her and to Apollo. Even if Hera had twisted some of his words, then he stepped out of the sanctuary. The morning light touched his face, the face of a man who was about to begin the most famous journey in all Greek mythology, the meeting with Eurystheus. Mycenae was a wealthy stronghold, its walls built with massive stones that people said only giants could lift. But what weighed on Hercules' heart was not the city's grandeur. It was Eurystheus, his distant cousin, the child who had become king only because Hera willed it. Eurystheus was not strong, not brave, not heroic, but he had something Hercules did not: power backed by Hera. When Hercules entered the court, Eurystheus tried to stand tall, but his eyes trembled as he looked at Hercules' massive frame. Jealousy flickered behind his fear. Standing on a high step, he declared coldly, "If you wish to be forgiven, if you wish to atone, then from this moment, you are mine to command. 12 years, 12 labors, no delays, no defiance." Hercules bowed, not because Eurystheus deserved respect, but because it was the only way to cleanse the blood from his soul. But Eurystheus wasn't finished. His voice dragged on, dripping with spite, and every labor must be completed without any help. Hercules remained silent. He knew every word was a trap laid by Hera, and still he accepted them. Eurystheus looked at Hercules as one might look at a newly acquired slave. He smirked, signaled for a servant to bring him a scroll, and read it slowly, as if savoring every word. The first labor: slay the Nemean lion, a beast whose skin no weapon can pierce. A task nearly impossible, and Eurystheus knew it well. He smiled. "Go then, if you survive." Hercules did not answer. He simply touched the ground with his fingertips, as if feeling the breath of the earth itself. Then he rose. No divine weapons, no armor, no gifts from Olympus, only his own strength and a heart bleeding with guilt. He turned away from Mycenae. A gentle wind stirred his hair. Before him lay distant mountains, bathed in morning light, where the lion awaited. Behind him, Hera watched from Olympus with a smile sharp as ice. And so, the 12 labors began. Hercules left Mycenae. His steps were slow, but they never trembled. He did not know if he would survive, but he knew this. If this path was the only way to become worthy of life again, then he would walk it to the very end. The first labor, the Nemean lion. Hercules walked along long dirt roads until he reached the region of Nemea, where the sun was always veiled by mist, and the trees grew so thick that even light had to squeeze through in thin, wandering rays. The people there lived in unending fear. The lion child of Typhon and Echidna was so powerful that no weapon could pierce its hide. Hercules stopped before the clearest signs of destruction. White bones scattered across the ground, armor, torn open helmets crushed and bent, spears snapped, blades warped like wax left too close to the fire. It wasn't that those warriors were weak. They failed because what they carried, their weapons, were useless. Hercules understood at once this labor would not be won with swords and spears. It required his own strength. The first clash, he stepped into the cave. The darkness was so thick it felt like it swallowed his breath. A low growl rolled out from deep inside, rough, heavy like boulders grinding through a tunnel. Then, two golden eyes split open in the night like twin flames. The lion charged faster than human eyes could follow. Hercules twisted aside his hand, catching its mane, and in that instant he knew this was no ordinary beast. Its muscles were as solid as stone. Its breath burned like a forge. Its power was so great the earth trembled slightly with every step. Hercules let his weapon fall. Bare-handed, he locked his arms around the lion's neck. Two massive forms wrestled amid rock and dust, their roars shaking the canopy above. Its claws dug into stone, carving deep grooves like lightning scars, but Hercules kept squeezing. The first second, the beast screamed in rage. By the third, it heaved entire tree trunks into the air. By the 10th minute, its breathing grew heavy. By the second hour, its strength began to fade. And finally, there was a short, sharp crack, the sound of bones breaking like a flash of lightning in the night. The lion fell huge and heavy like a mountain collapsing. Hercules placed his hand on its head, whispering an apology, for he never wished to kill any creature unless he had no other choice. Using the lion's own claws, Hercules flayed the divine hide, for nothing else was sharp enough to cut through that skin. He draped the pelt over his shoulders. The lion's head became a war helmet. The hide became the perfect armor. Nothing could break through it. It was not just a cloak. It was the symbol of the road of atonement he had stepped onto. When he returned to Mycenae, Eurystheus was so terrified, he hid inside a large clay jar, peeking out with only his eyes. Hercules said nothing, only lowered his head, and the first labor was complete. The second labor, the Hydra of Lerna. No one went near the lake of Lerna unless they wished to invite disaster. The people said, the trees around the lake were all withered. The marsh was always simmering, and on windy nights screams like shackled souls rose up from the water's surface. At the farthest end of that lake lived a creature whose power surpassed the limits of human imagination. Hydra, child of Typhon and Echidna, a monster with 9 heads, one of them immortal, unable to be killed, unable to be destroyed. Hera had not raised Hydra to protect humanity, but to kill Hercules. When she heard that Hercules had survived the first labor, her anger flared like fire under the skin. She whispered into the night, "If Hydra cannot kill him, then I will send another." So she sent a giant crab Carcinos to lurk in the mud below, ready to strike. This trial was no longer just a task. It was a divine trap. When Hercules reached Lerna, the fog was so thick he couldn't see his own feet. The water beneath him was as cold as a blade of metal cutting skin. At every step, the mud bubbled up as if something was breathing right beneath the surface. He didn't rush. He didn't shout for Hydra like he had for the Nemean lion. He simply stood there calm, listening to the marsh breathe. Then the water began to move. Ripples spread outward slowly as if the lake were waking up. The first head emerged, slick black, as long as a grown man's body. Then the second, then the third, until all 9 heads rose from the water, swaying like living pillars of stone, their breath steaming white, stinking like rotting flesh. Hydra watched him with 9 glowing red eyes and laughed. It was a laugh made of breath and stench, and the slap of water against the shore, a sound that made the skin crawl. Hydra lunged forward with impossible speed. Hercules swung his club. A thunderous crack rang out as the first head was smashed apart. But as soon as it hit the ground, 2 new heads sprouted from the raw red stump, wriggling like newborn serpents. Hercules stepped back, his heart tightening with understanding. This was nothing like the Nemean lion, nothing like the metal birds, nothing like any foe he had faced before. Each strike only made Hydra stronger. Hydra surged forward, and the giant crab erupted from the mud, its claws locking around Hercules' ankle and dragging him down. He lost his footing. The 9 heads of Hydra reared up like a living storm and struck down together. If that blow landed, Hercules would be torn apart. In that instant, for the first time in many years, Hercules felt a familiar fear, not fear of death, but fear of failure. Fear that he was not enough to atone for his sins. Fear that those who died by his hand would never find peace. Just as Hydra was about to strike, a soft whoosh cut through the air. An arrow flew from afar and buried itself in Hydra's body. It only pushed the monster back 1 step, but that was enough. Hercules turned and saw Iolaus, his nephew, standing on a rise bough and torch in hand. The boy he had once taught how to hold a sword now stood before him, eyes shining with a courage Hercules had not expected. Iolaus said quietly, "You don't have to fight alone." No more words were needed. The two understood each other. Hercules charged his club, rising like a small thunderbolt. With every blow, one of Hydra's heads fell. But the moment a head dropped, Iolaus pressed the blazing torch to the severed neck. The flesh burned black. No new head could grow. Hydra screamed, thrashing wildly, its heads biting in all directions, spewing poison into the air, scorching the ground. But Hercules did not retreat. He advanced like a living boulder through a boiling marsh. The longer they fought, the more he felt something unusual. He was not beating Hydra alone. It wasn't just his strength. For the first time, he was not alone in the battle. The flame in Iolaus's hand slowly tilted the fight in their favor. The fire glowed on the water, casting 100 trembling Hydra shadows across the surface. It shone on Hercules' face, turning him into a figure, half man, half god. The 7th head fell. The 8th burned black. Only one remained. The last head bigger, greener, its eyes burning with malice, hissing like wind slicing through stone. Hydra hurled itself forward twice as fast as before, its skull slamming into Hercules' chest like a hammer blow. He staggered half a step. The ground slid beneath him, but he did not fall. Hercules gripped his club with both hands, gathered the strength of 12 grown men, and brought it down. The strike was like lightning splitting the night. The immortal head was severed, tumbling across the ground, biting at nothing in desperate fury. Hercules did not hesitate. He heaved up a boulder 10 times heavier than any ordinary man could lift and buried the head beneath it so it would never rise again. The marsh of Lerna fell silent. No more screams. No more hissing. Only the sound of 2 men breathing a hero and a young warrior standing in a swamp that had finally known peace. Hydra was dead, but what remained was even more dangerous than the monster itself. Hercules dipped his arrows into Hydra's blood, the strongest poison in all Greek mythology. Just 1 scratch would be enough to make any enemy die in agony. But Hercules did not yet know that this same poison would one day destroy his own life. A circle of fate began with the very blood he now touched. Iolaus looked at him worried. "Uncle, do you think we've gone too far?" Hercules shook his head. "No, this is war. But remember, this power must be used carefully." When Hercules returned, Eurystheus turned pale with fear, as always. But when he calmed down, he gave a familiar excuse. "This labor does not count. You had help." On Olympus, Hera smiled coldly. She knew that step by step, with every drop of sweat, every drop of blood, she was pushing Hercules toward his final destiny. He did not argue. He did not rage. He did not protest. He simply stood there, his eyes as deep as the night at Lerna, and said softly, "I will do another labor." For by now he understood. The cruelest things in his life did not come from monsters. They came from injustice, from hatred, and from divine hands that refused to ever let him go. But he remained standing, for to atone for his own sins mattered more than anything else. The third labor. The hind of Serenia Artemis's golden deer. The third labor seemed lighter. Capture the golden-horned hind with bronze hooves and shining antlers, the sacred creature of Artemis, without harming it, which meant Hercules had to use his mind, not his strength. The hind was faster than lightning, able to run through the forest without breaking a single twig. Hercules chased it for a whole year, over mountains, through forests, across valleys, through vast open fields. His feet grew calloused, his cloak tore on branches, but he did not give up. One dawn, the deer stopped at the banks of the laden river to drink. Hercules knew this was his only chance. He did not shoot at the deer, but beside it. The arrow struck the ground, startling the hind, making it slip into the rushing water. Its speed faltered. Hercules leaped in, gently looping a rope around its legs, binding them. The deer was unharmed. The labor was complete. But as he left the mountains, the sky opened before him, and Artemis appeared, bow already drawn. Her voice was cold as frost. "You dare lay hands on my creature?" Hercules knelt. He did not justify himself, only spoke the truth. He had done it under Eurystheus's command. Apollo appeared beside his sister and said, "Hercules has done no wrong. It is Hera who stands behind these trials." Artemis fell silent. After a time, she lowered her bow and said, "Release the hind once your task is done." Hercules bowed in agreement. Eurystheus was once again stunned when Hercules brought the deer back and begged him not to bring the animal too close to the palace. The fourth labor, the Erymanthian boar. The sun had barely risen when Hercules reached the foothills. Dark pines stood close together, whispering in the wind like warriors murmuring about a danger ahead. The snow beneath his feet was so deep that every step felt like sinking into the land's own old memories. The people said that here every roar of the boar sent snow crashing from rooftops, and every scratch of its tusks against rock left gouges so deep even spring rain could not fill them. That boar was no ordinary creature. It was the child of the north wind Boreas, and a mountain spirit of Erymanthos made not only of flesh and bone, but of the primal fury of nature itself. Hercules looked up at the peak shrouded in cloud where the wind howled like the sighs of gods. He gripped his oak club and began the climb. On the way, Hercules came upon the caves of the centaurs, the half-man, half-horse beings, old companions from his training days. Pholus, a gentle centaur, invited him inside to take shelter from the cold wind. They sat by a red fire, talking in low voices about life battles and the hero's struggle to atone for his sins. Wanting to honor Hercules, Pholus opened a jar of sacred wine belonging to all centaurs. A single strand of its scent drifted out and summoned an entire band of centaurs from afar. They stormed into the cave, angry, roaring, demanding to know why Hercules dared open their sacred vessel. Chaos broke out too quickly. Hercules fired arrows tipped with Hydra's poison only to defend himself. But in the frenzy, one stray arrow struck Chiron the immortal and wise teacher. One arrow, one wound no one could heal, and a teacher who could not die yet had to endure a pain that could have broken a titan. Zeus, moved with pity, raised Chiron to the sky, making him the constellation Sagittarius the archer. Pholus, out of simple curiosity, picked up one of the poisoned arrows. It slipped from his hand, struck his foot, and he fell dead at once. Hercules stood between two bodies, two friends, as if standing between two halves of his own heart, being torn apart by the wind. He did not weep, but his shoulders sank as if Mount Erymanthos itself had leaned upon them. That day, Hercules understood once more, death always walked behind a hero, even when he never wished it to. He buried his friends, piled stones over their graves, and whispered his farewells into the snow-bound air. Then he continued on, slower, heavier, but he did not stop. The higher he climbed, the thicker the snow. All sounds were muffled, leaving only his footsteps and the faint sighs of the pine forest. And then in that moment, a roar tore the sky apart. It was unlike any sound made by beast. It thundered like a storm, like lightning running through the bones of the mountain. Hercules stopped. Far ahead through the white haze, a massive shadow appeared, the Erymanthian boar. It was nearly the size of a horse, its fur black as night, its breath billowing thick clouds like smothered flames. Its eyes glowed red like coals about to crack. Its tusks were long and curved sharp as sickle blades. It plowed through the snow toward Hercules like a living storm. The ground shook. Not just from its weight, but from the primal anger coursing through its veins. Hercules did not meet it head-on with force. He dodged aside using a tree trunk as a shield, and the boar's charge splintered the massive trunk as though it were a thin door. Snow flew in all directions. Hercules thought quickly. He could not overpower it by brute force. He could not wrestle it on the slick, icy ground. But he could lead it. He ran up the slope, drawing the boar after him. Each of its steps stomped deep craters in the snow, sending avalanches sliding down. When they approached an area of thick, soft snow near a steep drop, Hercules darted aside. The boar lunged straight into the drift, its legs sinking deep at once. It bellowed, it thrashed, but the more it struggled, the more the snow swallowed it. That was the moment Hercules had waited for. He rushed up, wrapped chains around its snout, bound its hind legs, and twisted his body to slam it down. The boar's roar echoed far, touching every pine in the forest. But in the end, it yielded. When Hercules led the boar back to Mycenae, the people stared with wide eyes. But Eurystheus, at the first sight of the beast, screamed and ran straight into his now familiar clay jar. Hercules looked at him, then lowered the boar to the ground as if setting down a sack. No rebuke, no boasting. He was too busy to linger. As darkness fell over the distant hills, Hercules stopped for a moment. The lion's skin on his shoulders still carried the warmth of battle, and the chill of Mount Erymanthos clung to his legs, reminding him of all he had just endured. For the first time in many days, there were no roars, no claws, no stench of death, only silence, and in that silence truth slowly emerged. What Hercules has learned. Strength was no longer enough. Hercules looked at his hands, hands that could break a lion's neck and lift stones like mountains. But he knew now, no strength alone could pierce the skin of Nemea. No single blow could stop Hydra from growing new heads. No speed could outrun Artemis's hind, and no punch could save the centaur teachers who had died. Strength had carried him far, but strength had also once made him lose everything. It was wisdom that had opened the way to survival. He remembered the fire in Iolaus's hand over the marsh of Lerna. He remembered shooting at the ground to frighten the hind rather than spill its blood. He remembered using the snow on Erymanthos to bring the boar down. Those victories did not come from muscle, but from calm observation and something gentler within him. Hercules exhaled slowly, not in relief, not in surrender, but in recognition. For the first time since madness had shattered his life, since blood he did not choose had stained his hands, he understood something with terrifying clarity, that the tone he could not rely on strength alone. Muscle had carried him through monsters. Fury had carried him through battles. But neither could carry him through guilt. If redemption was possible at all, it would not be won by force. It would require restraint, judgment, the willingness to endure rather than strike back. It would require his mind and his heart. Above him, the sky deepened into a dark violet, that brief, uneasy hour when day has fully withdrawn, but night has not yet claimed its dominion. Stars began to appear one by one, cold and distant like eyes that never blink. Hercules lifted his head toward that sky. He could not see her. No thunder split the clouds. No divine voice echoed across the hills. And yet he knew. Hera was watching, not with rage, not with passion, but with a cold patience far more dangerous. She watched as a queen watches a long game unfold one move, already made many still to come. The madness, the slaughter, the unbearable knowledge of what he had done. Those had not been the punishment, they had been the beginning. The first 4 labors Hercules now understood were not trials meant to break him. They were a greeting, a measured acknowledgement, a test of whether he would resist or submit. What remained would be different, crueler, more precise. Not monsters that roared and charged, but ordeals that cornered the soul. Tasks that could not be solved with rage. Labors that forced him to choose between pride and humility, between defiance and obedience. Hera would not stop. Not because she was merciless, but because mercy was not her aim. She wanted transformation, or destruction. And yet Hercules did not tremble. His hands, once clenched in reflexive readiness for violence, slowly relaxed at his sides. His breath steadied. His posture changed, not defiant, not broken, but grounded. Inside his chest, where rage had once burned like wildfire, there was now something else, very small, very quiet, a flame that did not consume. It did not shout. It did not demand victory. It simply endured. It was the resolve of a man who had lost everything and yet refused to flee from what remained. The resolve to walk forward without certainty, to carry guilt without letting it rot into despair. This flame was not hope in the naive sense. It was not optimism. It was something harder. Acceptance that the road ahead would be long, that suffering would not end quickly, that forgiveness, if it came at all, would come slowly. Hercules stood there beneath the darkening sky, a figure caught between godhood and humanity, between punishment and purpose. The labors awaited him, each one heavier than the last, each one stripping away another layer of illusion. And for the first time, the hero understood the true shape of his fate, not to conquer the world, not to defy the gods, but to become someone worthy of surviving himself. The night deepened, the stars burned on, and Hercules took his first step forward, not as a weapon of Olympus, but as a man choosing to endure. If Hera wants me to fall, then I will stand until the very end. He pulled the lion's skin tighter around him and stepped into the night. The road ahead was long, and Hercules understood one thing. To walk it to the end, he would have to become stronger than even himself. Before him lay the 5th labor, cleaning the stables of Augeas, a task that sounded simple, but hid the deepest humiliation. And after that, a series of ever more difficult labors would follow one after another, pushing Hercules to the border between life and death. 5th labor, cleaning. King Augeas's cattle stables. That morning, Greek sunlight spilled over the honey-colored hills, soft and quiet, like the silk of the goddess Eos spread across the earth. Hercules walked along the dirt path, leading into the lands of King Augeas, not knowing that this task, so ordinary on the surface, would become one of the most bitter lessons of his life. After the brutal battle with the Erymanthian boar, after nights of skin-cutting snow, after the roar of the beast still echoed in his chest, Hercules thought Eurystheus would give him a challenge worthy of his strength to defeat some monster or cross an ancient labyrinth. But no, Eurystheus simply handed him an order, his voice dripping with mockery. Go and clean the cattle stables. No lion, no sea monster, no mythical creature, just cow dung. An insult wrapped in the shell of a royal command. Hercules said nothing. He took the written order, folded it neatly, and turned away. But deep in his eyes, a brief light flickered, not anger, but the calm of someone who understands that every trial carries a meaning of its own. The cattle stables of King Augeas rose before him, like an old mountain lying in the middle of the valley. It was not a stable. It was a small city of livestock, thousands of immortal cattle belonging to Helios, the sun god. 30 years without anyone cleaning it. 30 years of manure piling layer upon layer, dry then wet again, packed down, then overflowing. The stench was so strong. Even the wind seemed to change direction to avoid it. The trees around the area had turned gray, as if someone had drained all life from them. The soil was no longer brown, but a filthy black. Even the sky above carried a strange haze, thin yet heavy. The farmers stood far away, watching Hercules approach, their eyes full of pity. No one thought he could do it. No one thought this task was fair. Eurystheus didn't want him to succeed. He wanted to humiliate him. Hercules stood before the tall wooden gate. The reeking stench hit his face like a handful of hot ash. He didn't flinch. He didn't complain. He simply stood there for a long time. And then suddenly, Hercules smiled a gentle smile, thin as the last ray of sunlight at dusk. Not a proud smile, not a smile of resignation, but the smile of someone who knows if I cannot choose the trial, I can still choose how I face it. The people thought he was giving up after just one look. They whispered, "Not even Hercules can do that. How can one man clean that whole stable in a single day?" But Hercules did not walk away out of defeat. He walked toward the river. To the south, the mountains opened into a rocky pass where the two greatest rivers of the region met in an unending roar, Alpheus and Peneus. The current was so strong that even the rocks at the bottom were worn down. But the water was so clear that if you looked closely, you could see every pebble like tiny stars on the riverbed. Hercules stepped down to the bank and bent to touch the icy flow. His gaze was calm like a blacksmith studying the forge before heating the blade. Then he drove his staff into the ground. A mark. He began to dig. No shovel, no axe, only his hands, the hands that had defeated lions, wrestled monsters, and now became the humblest of tools. Earth flew up in layers, sweat mingled with dust. But Hercules did not stop. He dug a great channel straight deep and determined like an oath carved into the earth itself. The more he dug, the stronger the wind grew, as if Poseidon himself were watching. When the channel was wide enough, Hercules used a great stone slab to redirect the river. Like a flood released from its chains, water from the two rivers crashed into the new canal. The sound of the rushing torrent roared like drums beaten by titans. The water surged into the cattle stables not to destroy, but to cleanse. Mud, manure, and filth that had built up for 30 long years dissolved into the water and were swept away, leaving behind soft, clean soil, as if the land itself had been reborn. The whole valley took on a new color. The trees rose again as though they had drunk from a hidden spring. The people stared in amazement. What had seemed an attempt to demean Hercules had become a masterpiece of ingenuity. When Hercules went to Augeas to claim the reward they had agreed upon, the king stared at him for a long while. It was not the gaze of gratitude. It was the gaze of a calculating man. Augeas smirked. It was the river that did the work, not you. I owe you nothing. Phyleus, the king's son, stood up in protest. I saw Hercules with my own eyes. Father, you cannot lie before the gods. Augeas spun around, his face red with rage. Both of you leave my kingdom at once. Hercules said nothing. Phyleus looked at him, guilt and shame in his eyes. But Hercules simply placed a hand on the young prince's shoulder and shook his head, telling him there was no need to apologize for another man's ingratitude. When he returned to Mycenae, Eurystheus sneered again. "You accepted payment. This labor doesn't count." A great labor erased with a single sentence. No roar, no battle, no weapons, only injustice. Hercules looked down at his hands, hands that still smelled of earth and river water. And in that moment he understood. Sometimes monsters do not have fangs or claws. Sometimes monsters wear the faces of men. But he did not scream. He did not rage. He did not tear the palace down. He simply stood tall, his broad shoulders blocking the wind. For Hercules knew, the road of atonement is not a road of joy. It is a road of trials, of wounds, and of lessons that not even a demigod can escape. And he walked on. Sixth labor, the man-eating birds of Lake Stymphalos. Hercules stood in silence on the shore of Lake Stymphalos, where the black water lay still like Hades' own mirror. The damp smell of moss and reeds drifted in the wind, and from the distant trees came the faint whir of metallic wings, clicking cold like iron claws tapping against bone. He walked slowly along the water's edge, eyes tracking every movement in the sky. The flock did not appear, but he could feel them. They were lurking on the high branches, like hundreds of eyes glinting in the forest darkness. Then, Kealang, a sharp metallic sound rang out behind him, brief but enough to make the leaves tremble. Hercules turned. No one there, only a rotting tree trunk, and on it 2 round objects glimmered faintly beneath a veil of night dust, 2 bronze drums. They were no ordinary drums. On their surfaces were carved owls and spears, symbols of Athena. The breeze stirred and the thin dust on the drumheads blew away, as if brushed aside by an invisible hand. Hercules stepped closer. He laid his palm on one drum. The metal was cold as spring water, yet a gentle presence pulsed within it, like the distant heartbeat of the goddess of wisdom. He did not ask why. He did not call out. He did not search. Hercules simply bowed his head, a small bow, but filled with gratitude, because he knew Athena had been here. Quietly, silently, but always watching over those who sought victory through wisdom rather than brute force. The drums resound, and the night is torn open. Hercules carried the 2 drums to a low hill jutting out over the lake's edge. From there, he could see the entire expanse of the dark water, like the mouth of an endless well. He set the drums down, took 2 wooden mallets, closed his eyes, and breathed. One long breath. A breath to steady his mind, to let his heart sink deep as the lake's bottom. Then Hercules struck. Clang. The first sound rang out like a flash of lightning. It was not heavy, not like war drums rolling over a battlefield. It was sharp, a pure metallic note, piercing and prolonged like a sword drawn from its scabbard, like a blade of light slashing the dark. The mist over the lake shivered. The water rippled waves spreading out like eyes opening in the night. Hercules struck again. Clang, clang, clang. The sound seemed to fly straight upward, slicing through the thick canopy, crashing into the cliff faces, and echoing back as thousands of razor-edged vibrations. Then the sky shook. The flock awakens. A storm of metal. From deep within the forest, pairs of golden eyes flared to life. A shrill screech split the air, and hundreds of metallic birds shot upward like black arrows. Their wings were thin sheets of metal, catching the moonlight as they beat. Each flap made a rasping sound like knives scraping against stone. They twisted together into a single mass of storm. Then they plunged toward Hercules, but he was ready, poisoned arrows and a rain of steel, Hercules drew his bow. The bow bent like a young crescent moon. His arrows tipped with Hydra's poison glimmered violet in the dark. He loosed 1, 2, 3. Each arrow shot upward like a streak of purple lightning, cutting through the air through the steel wings of the flock. Metal cracked and snapped. One by one, the birds fell slamming into the lake like chunks of iron dropped onto an anvil. But the flock did not stop. They wheeled across the sky, firing their razor-sharp feathers downward into sand, into stone, and into tree trunks, making the forest ring with the harsh sound of metal driving deep into wood. Hercules stepped back once, but did not falter. He kept shooting steady, powerful, precise. Every arrow was a breath, a violet spark, a creature brought down. The flock grew thinner. Steel wings were scattered along the shore, falling in the wind like pieces of shattered armor. Silence returns. The lake as if it never knew darkness. At last, only a few weak birds remained flapping unsteadily before disappearing into the clouds. A great gust of wind swept across, and the metal feathers fell like a rain of steel striking the ground with a cold sound that slowly softened. Then silence. A thick, beautiful, pure silence. Like the end of some ancient rite, the surface of Lake Stymphalos grew still again. White mist drifted lazily, as if nothing had ever happened. Hercules let his shoulders relax. He looked up to the sky where the flock had once formed a massive black cloud. Nothing remained. Only tiny stars trembling faintly, as though the gods themselves were applauding. Hercules bent down and placed his hand upon one of the bronze drums, the object that had saved him, without a single swing of his club. He whispered softly, "Thank you, Athena." Then he turned away, leaving behind a lake restored to the peace it once knew. Seventh labor, capturing the white bull of Minos in Crete. Long ago, Poseidon, god of the sea, granted Minos a magnificent white bull, so white that sunlight could hardly reflect upon it, so white it seemed like a great wave of sea foam washed ashore. Minos made a vow, "I will sacrifice this bull to you." But as he looked closely, he realized the creature was too beautiful to be killed. He kept it and sacrificed a lesser, uglier bull instead. Poseidon saw. No god tolerates deceit, least of all when it springs from greed. His anger did not erupt in thunder, nor in raging storms. It came in the form of a quiet curse. The white bull went mad. From its once gentle eyes, fire flared like volcanic ash. Its warm breath turned into a scorching wind that burned the grass. Its hooves crushed the fields, smashed stone walls, trampled vineyards, terrifying the villagers so badly that they feared to go outside even in daylight. Minos wanted Hercules to destroy the beast, but royal pride kept him from saying it outright. When Hercules arrived at the palace, Minos merely said calmly, "If you can capture it without harming it, you are free to take it." It sounded like an offer. But in Minos's heart, he only hoped Hercules would kill the animal and end their nightmare. The fields of Crete stretched out under the sun, the yellow grass flattened by the wild strength of the white bull. It stood in the middle of the plain body, massive like living stone shoulders, broad, its white coat blazing like lightning, and its eyes red, frenzied, burning with Poseidon's rage. Hercules watched it from a distance. He did not reach for his bow. He did not take up his club. He did not drape the lion's skin over his shoulders. No armor, no helmet. Only himself, a man of flesh and bone and breath. Standing before the fury of a god, he walked toward it, step by step, slow and steady, as if speaking to the beast through the rhythm of his footsteps. The bull bellowed a roar so deep that the birds in the forest burst from the trees. Then it charged. Each stride sent small tremors through the ground. Grass flew, stones shattered. Its horns shone like two spears of white steel. Anyone else would have turned and run. But Hercules waited for the exact moment when the bull shifted direction, when its hind legs bent to gather force. He pivoted a small, swift movement and seized the horns. In that instant, the bull felt Hercules' hands steady, unshaken, carrying a strength that did not come from hatred, but from the calm of someone who had already faced death many times. The bull thrashed, kicking up soil and stone, dragging Hercules across the ground. But he held fast. Every muscle in his body strained like a drawn bow. The earth trembled. The bull's breath burned against his face like the heat from a furnace door. Then Hercules pulled to one side, turned his body, lowered his center of gravity, and used technique, not just strength, to throw the bull to the ground. No stabbing, no slashing, no killing, only control. The bull heaved a few more heavy breaths, then lay still beneath his hand. The wind of Crete swept across the fields, passing over the beast's body, as if soothing the last of its madness. No ropes, no chains, no whip. Hercules simply rested his hand on the bull's neck, and it followed him tame, as though it had never ravaged an entire kingdom. When they reached Mycenae, Eurystheus, the most cowardly king in all Greek myth, saw the bull from afar. Two white horns appeared over the fields. Eurystheus screamed like a child. "Ah! Take it away! Don't leave it here." He leapt into a giant storage jar, slammed the lid shut, and shouted from inside. "I acknowledge it. I acknowledge it. Just take it away at once." Hercules only nodded. He did not speak. He did not laugh. He had grown used to cowardice and injustice. He led the bull to Marathon, where sea winds blew strong and the land stretched out like a green carpet all the way to the horizon. There he let go. The white bull took a few steps, raised its head, and shook its horns. In the evening light, it was no longer fierce, no longer mad. Only the primal beauty remained, the beauty of the creature Poseidon had once gifted to mortals. It galloped away, its body shrinking into a small white dot in the distance until it merged with the horizon's line. Hercules watched it for a long time. He knew what ordinary people did not. Every creature has its own fate. Killing is not always the true victory. No one in Marathon knew that the bloodline of that white bull would continue for generations, and one day, from that very lineage would be born a being half man, half beast, the Minotaur monster of the labyrinth. But that is a story for another time, another page, another legend beyond the eighth labor. As for Hercules, he turned his back on the wide, empty fields and walked toward his next trial with the understanding that the strongest one is not always the one who strikes the final blow, but the one who knows when to let go. Eighth labor, taking the girdle of the Amazon queen Hippolyta. The land of the Amazons was unlike any place Hercules had ever set foot in. Fields wide as a golden sea, the ring of swords striking shields like drum beats, horses thundering across the ground so hard that the earth burst into dusty mist. Hippolyta, their queen, was famed for her courage, her sharp mind, and the golden girdle Poseidon had given her as a symbol of her power. Hercules did not come with his sword raised. He came bearing gifts, respect, and humility. When they met, the atmosphere was completely different from what Hercules had prepared himself for. Hippolyta showed no hostility. Instead, she looked at him as one would look at someone who had endured more loss than battle. After hearing the reason for his journey, she smiled. "If this will help you atone, I will not stand in your way." She agreed to give him the girdle. A rare moment of trust between the Amazon realm and the son of Zeus. But Hera took the form of an Amazon warrior and whispered rumors into their ears. Hercules plans to abduct the queen. The crowd flared into a storm. Horses shrieked, steel rang. and the Amazon warriors charged at Hercules like a torrent of iron. Hercules did not want to fight, but to live he had to. Battle erupted under a blood-red sunset. Metal clashed in harsh, echoing crashes. Shouts and cries rolled across the distant mountains. When Hippolyta rushed forward to stop the fighting, it was already too late. She was gravely wounded and collapsed in the arms of her closest general. Hercules stood there, not celebrating, only silent. He picked up the girdle, knowing it was no longer a gift, but a memory of a tragedy that was never truly his fault, yet had fallen on his shoulders all the same. These 4 labors were unlike the earlier ones. It was no longer just monsters that fell. There were also friends' bonds of comradeship, innocent souls, and pacts of trust shattered by Hera. Hercules began to understand that a hero does not only fight monsters, he must also face the consequences of victories he never truly wanted. If you're lying in bed right now, let your body sink just a little deeper. The night outside is closing, and together we open a door to ancient lands where Hercules steps into the final stretch of his path of atonement. 9th labor, the man-eating horses of King Diomedes. The winds of Thrace always blow as if there were blades hidden inside them. Cold sharp and carrying the metallic scent of iron, of blood, of things humans were never meant to witness. King Diomedes of this land was a cruel man. He owned a herd of horses, not to pull chariots or plow fields, but to eat human flesh. Every day, Diomedes ordered his soldiers to seize lost travelers, prisoners the weak and helpless, tie them up, and throw them into the trough so the horses could shriek with delight as they tore into human skin. Those screams haunted the Thracian coastline. Hercules arrived on a gray afternoon. The sun hid behind clouds, and the sea sighed in heavy waves. Inside the stables, iron hooves hammered against stone chains, scraped on wooden posts, and thick labored breaths filled the air. He was not alone. Beside him walked a young man, a loyal companion he had brought along, whom we'll call Abdus. Abdus had no superhuman strength, but he possessed a brave heart, always ready to walk at Hercules' side. That night, they crept up to the stables in secret. With his great strength, Hercules tore the iron gate off its hinges as if snapping a dried twig. The horses burst out eyes, blood-red foam spraying from their mouths, their teeth stained dark with human blood. They were wild with madness, dragging heavy iron chains that clattered across the stone floor. Hercules seized the chain of the lead stallion, braced his legs, and wrenched its head away from the city. He shouted to Abdus hold the others. "Lead them out of here!" Abdus nodded, gripping the chains, trying to pull the horses away. But their frenzy was unlike anything he had ever faced. They clawed at the ground, yanked the chains so hard that Abdus's whole body was jerked and swung. In that moment, Diomedes received the alarm. He rode out with his men, their swords and spears flashing under the lightning-slashed sky. Battle erupted along the shore. Waves crashed, wind howled, steel rang against steel. Hercules fought like a storm, and Diomedes fell beneath his blade. But when Hercules turned back, all he saw were trampled hoofprints in the sand and streaks of fresh bright blood. Abdus was gone. The horses in their ravenous hunger had torn apart the very young man Hercules had trusted. The cold Thracian wind slipped under his cloak like the edge of a knife. Hercules knelt on the sand, placed his hand over the dried patches of blood, and in that moment, he was not a hero, not a demigod, not an undefeated warrior. He was only a man who had lost a friend in a trial he never wanted to pay such a price for. In anger, but also in a hard, bitter calm, Hercules dragged Diomedes' corpse back to the stables. He flung the cruel king into the trough, the very place where so many innocent victims had once screamed. For the first time, the horses tasted the blood of the one who had turned them into monsters. When Hercules led them away, they no longer shrieked. They followed quietly subdued, as if the madness had been drained out of them, along with Diomedes' death. Leading the horses back to Mycenae, Hercules never once smiled in triumph. Because in this labor, he had not only spent his strength, he had lost a friend, and the hero understood something more. Every victory comes with a price. 10th labor, the red cattle of Geryon, at the edge of the world, from cold Thrace. Hercules was ordered to travel even farther to the far western edge of the world, where the ancient Greeks believed the sun fell into the sea every evening. There, on an island called Erythea, lived Geryon, a three-bodied giant who guarded a rare herd of red cattle. That was the 10th labor, to seize the red cattle and bring them back to Mycenae. To reach Erythea, Hercules had to cross deserts so hot that the air itself shimmered like fire. The earth split into black charred cracks. Even he, a man who had endured more than any mortal, felt as though the sun was baking him down to his very bones. At one point, no longer able to bear the heat, Hercules drew his bow and shot an arrow into the sky toward the sun, not to threaten, but as if to challenge. Do you really need to burn the world this much? Helios. Yet the sun god did not grow angry. Helios laughed a blazing golden smile in the burning sky. For he saw in Hercules not insolence, but courage. The god gifted Hercules a golden boat, the very vessel Helios himself used each night to return to the east. Hercules stepped into the radiant boat, drifting silently across the vast sea, over waves black and gleaming, until Erythea appeared a lonely island at what people believed to be the edge of the world. On that island were Orthrus, the two-headed hound brother of Cerberus, Eurytion the cattle herdsman, and higher up in a stone fortress, Geryon, a giant with 3 bodies, 3 heads, 3 chests, 3 arms on each side, but only 1 pair of legs, thick as pillars of rock. Hercules set foot on the shore. Orthrus attacked, first teeth, bared eyes blazing. One swing of Hercules' club, and the dog collapsed. Eurytion charged immediately afterward, spear in hand, shouting a long battle cry. But Hercules bore no hatred for the herdsman. He dodged at first, and when he had no choice but to strike, he did so quickly and cleanly, sparing Eurytion from prolonged agony. Then Geryon appeared. From afar, he looked like 3 men fused into one. Closer, each body gleamed in iron armor, each hand gripping a different weapon, each face fixing Hercules with a gaze from a different angle. This would not be a simple fight. On the wide meadow, Geryon's footsteps made the ground quake. He charged swinging weapons from 3 directions at once. Hercules fell back, searching for an opening. He knew he could not simply rush in like a beast. He had to use the same thing that had carried him this far, his mind. He retreated farther, raised his bow. Taking an arrow dipped in Hydra's poison, he aimed at Geryon's central body, the junction where all 3 forms met. The arrow flew deep purple in the last light of day. It pierced the armor, pierced bone, pierced the heart of all 3 bodies at once. Geryon felt his collapse, rumbling like a mountain breaking apart. Hercules gathered the red cattle and drove them onto the golden boat, carrying them away. On the journey home, he faced thieves' storms stirred by the sea god Poseidon and mountains that blocked his path. But in the end, the cattle reached Mycenae and were offered as sacrifices to the gods. The 10th labor was completed not only through strength, but through the courage to travel to the world's very edge, to dare shoot an arrow at the sun, and still be answered by the gods with A golden boat, 11th labor, the golden apples of the Hesperides. Eurystheus looked at Hercules with eyes half fearful, half triumphant. He knew Hercules was stronger than wild beasts, faster than divine creatures, harder than mountain stone. But this time he wanted to play at the god's own kind of game. Bring me the golden apples, the wedding gift Gaia gave to Hera. The apples themselves were not large, not frightening. They had no fangs, no claws, but they were kept in a garden at the far western edge of the world, where the sun's light sank into the deep sea, where life and shadow were separated by only a breath. And that place was guarded by the 3 Hesperides nymphs, daughters of Nyx the night, and the dragon Ladon, a 100-headed monster whose heads never slept. No one knew how to reach the garden. No map marked the way. No song told the direction. And Eurystheus knew it. He wanted Hercules to wander lost forever. Hercules left Mycenae with no guidance, no compass, only the lion skin on his back and his own will. He crossed Libya, where the desert wind burned the skin like fire. He passed through the Sahara, leaving footprints on sands that people said had once been the floor of an ancient sea. He battled the Amazons, those unyielding warriors in misty forests where steel rang in the fog. And when the night sky finally opened before him, Hercules had reached the Caucasus, the mountain range, where an immortal soul suffered Zeus's harshest punishment. There, high on a barren peak, the groans of a giant blended with the whistling wind through stone. Prometheus. Prometheus was chained with divine shackles. Every day, a giant eagle flew down to tear at his liver. And every time the sun rose, the organ grew back only to endure the pain again. Hercules heard the great wings cleave the air. An eagle vast as a dark cloud swooped toward Prometheus. Without hesitation, Hercules drew his bow, and a hydra-poisoned arrow streaked out in a violet flash. The eagle fell like a boulder, and the sky above turned quiet. Prometheus exhaled, not just in relief, but because he was finally free. He looked at Hercules, his eyes worn by thousands of years, but behind them, a wordless gratitude. "I am in your debt," Prometheus said, "and I will show you a path no one else knows." He told Hercules, "Do not walk into the garden yourself. Do not fight Ladon. Do not confront the nymphs. Find Atlas, the one who bears the sky. He is the father of the Hesperides. Only he can step into the garden without being stopped by the gods." That was the only key. Atlas, the great titan, knelt his shoulders, bearing the entire sky clouds, stars, winds, and the weight of cosmic order. Hercules approached. The cold breath of the heavens mingled with the warm breath of the earth. Atlas looked at Hercules, squinting slightly, as if seeing in him the shape of a new age, beings mighty, yet toyed with by gods. Hercules spoke, "I will carry the sky for you. In return, you will fetch the apples for me." Atlas laughed, a tired, ancient sound, pressed thin by time. "Are you certain of this, mortal?" Hercules nodded. Atlas lowered the sky onto his shoulders. And in that instant, Hercules understood why no god wanted this burden. It was not like the weight of stone, nor the pressure of a monstrous beast. The sky was as heavy as the order of the universe itself, as heavy as the stars burning above, as heavy as souls' prayers and the dreams of humankind. Hercules stood there, his feet sinking into the ground, the bones in his shoulders creaking like cracking stone. But he endured. Atlas walked away lighter than he had ever felt. He entered the garden of the Hesperides. Myths say he either deceived Ladon or slew Ladon, or lulled Ladon to sleep with the ancient tongue of Titans. Whichever the case, when Atlas returned, he carried 3 golden apples, gleaming like fragments of the sun fallen to earth. Atlas looked at Hercules, the man bearing the sky, and a thought stirred in his mind. Why should I keep suffering? Why not leave him here forever? He said, Hercules, I will deliver the apples to Eurystheus. You stay here and hold up the sky for me. No anger, no outrage. Hercules simply smiled, a thin, gentle smile like the evening wind. Very well, but before you go, help me take the sky back for a moment so I can adjust this lion skin under my shoulders. It's cutting into my flesh. Atlas, naive as a child who has just tasted freedom, nodded. He took the sky back upon his shoulders, and in that very moment, Hercules picked up the bag of golden apples, stepped back out of his reach, and said, Thank you for your help, Atlas. Then he walked away. The Titan's roar shook the clouds, rumbling like thunder trapped beneath the earth. But Hercules did not look back. When Hercules brought the apples to Mycenae, Eurystheus stared at them, unable to hide his greed. But Zeus looked down, and a soft thunder rolled over Olympus. No divine object was allowed to remain forever in mortal hands. Zeus gave the order, Return them to the garden of the Hesperides. Hercules set out again. No complaint, no regret. He placed the apples upon the altar of the garden behind a veil of violet mist. The Hesperides only nodded very slightly. They spoke no word. He turned and left, knowing that some things can never truly belong to mortals. 12th labor, Cerberus. The gates of the underworld and the final encounter with darkness. The last labor was unlike any trial before it. Eurystheus, certain this time that Hercules would die, commanded, Go down into the underworld. Bring back Cerberus, the three-headed hound that guards Hades' gate, and bring him to the world above. But you may not use any weapon. No one entered the realm of the dead while still alive, except death the gods and souls whose journeys had already ended. But Hercules was not like other men. Before descending into Hades, he went to Eleusis, taking part in sacred rites, so the gods would permit him to walk the land of the dead without violating the cosmic order. Then he reached the cave of Tanarum, one of the gateways to the underworld. He stepped inside. Light faded slowly behind him. Ahead lay only darkness, thick as frozen water. Each footstep echoed. Each breath became a thin mist. Pale spirits drifted around him. Warriors, farmers, kings, wanderers. Some recognized him, whispering his name. Hercules stopped when he saw Meleager the hero who had once hunted the Caledonian boar. Meleager spoke to him of his sister Deianira, saying she would later play an important role in Hercules' fate. When he reached the palace of the underworld, Hercules bowed before Hades and Persephone. He did not swagger. He made no demands. He simply asked, If you permit it, I wish to bring Cerberus to the world above and then return him unharmed. Hades studied him for a long time. In his eyes was no anger, only the careful weighing of a king who guards the balance of all things. You may take him, if you can subdue him with your bare hands. No sword, no bow, no club, only raw strength and will. Hercules walked to the gate where Cerberus lay. The three-headed hound fur, black mane of serpents, tail of venomous snake, eyes glowing like coals in a furnace, bellowed a roar. Its voice shook the rock walls. Its breath carried the stench of death of souls long dissolved into shadow. Hercules did not retreat. He lunged forward, wrapping both arms around the creature's neck. One head sank its teeth into his arm. One head howled, the last snapped for his shoulder. Its claws tore up the ground of the underworld stone, flying like rain. Poison from its tail cut into his skin. But Hercules held tight. He squeezed as he had once choked the Nemean lion, as he had borne the sky from Atlas's shoulders, as if he were embracing his own pain and refusing to let it devour him. Cerberus roared one last time. Then its strength began to fade. At last the beast collapsed, whimpering. Hercules gripped its chain and led it upward from the land of the dead. Sunlight burst over him as he emerged from the cave of Taenarum. The people of Mycenae saw him the hero leading the three-headed dog of Hades and fell completely silent. No one could speak. Eurystheus saw the sight and panicked so badly that he dove into his familiar great jar, not daring to show his face. Hercules let out a quiet laugh, not mocking, but because at last the 12 labors had come to an end. He returned Cerberus to Hades, keeping his promise. If you're lying still in the dark right now, let your body relax a little more. We've walked with Hercules through distant lands, through 12 labors blazing like sky fire, through victory's tears and destiny itself. Now his journey begins to slow, like a flame about to fade, like the last breath of afternoon. And there at that quiet edge, a tragedy waits for him one no sword can fight. After completing the 12 labors, Hercules was no longer bound by Eurystheus, nor by Apollo's oracle. He wandered across Greece, helping city-states driving away the last remaining monsters, mediating endless wars. Everywhere he went, people treated him as a savior. But even as crowds praised him and glory filled his days, there was still a dark corner in Hercules' heart, the memory of Megara and their 3 children. Those who had died by his own hands in the madness Hera had cast upon him. No achievement could erase that, but time and the kindness of others could soften the wound. In the kingdom of Calydon, Hercules met Deianira. She was not radiant like the goddesses he had known. She was like morning gentle quiet, carrying the softness that a man so battered by sorrow never thought he still needed. Hercules loved her like a wanderer finding clear water. And she, with her warm heart, accepted him knowing his life was tied to tragedy and fate. They were wed in song and torchlight, and for the first time, Hercules saw a future that was not stained with blood. After the wedding, the couple left Calydon to return home. They came to the river Evenus, where the current was fierce and hidden rocks churned the white water. A large centaur named Nessus stood guard there. Nessus had been one of the centaurs who survived the old conflict when Hercules hunted the Erymanthian boar. He had not forgotten Hercules, and he bore him no good will. He pretended to be courteous, bowed his head, and said, "This river is very dangerous. I will carry your lady across. You, Hercules, can surely swim on your own." Hercules, without suspicion, agreed. He had faced lions, Hydra's giants, and kings. What threat could a river hold? Deianira climbed onto Nessus's back, her arms tightening around his broad, unfamiliar shoulders. The centaur stepped into the river, the current immediately tugging at his legs, cold water curling around his knees, his waist, his chest. At first, everything seemed ordinary. The river roared as rivers always do, indifferent, ancient, unconcerned with the fates crossing its skin. But halfway across, something shifted. Nessus's breathing changed. The steady rhythm turned shallow, excited. His muscles tightened not against the current, but against the woman clinging to him. His voice, when it came, was no longer the calm tone of a guide. It was sharp, hungry, wrong. He tightened his grip on Deianira's fingers, digging into her flesh, and lurched toward the far bank, not walking now, but charging his hooves, striking the riverbed with violent intent. A grin split his face, cruel and knowing. Deianira screamed. Her cry tore through the thunder of water like a blade. "Hercules!" There was no hesitation, no warning, no plea. Hercules' body moved before thought could form. His hand reached for the bow as if guided by fate itself. He drew an arrow already steeped in Hydra's poison, the venom that dissolved flesh, that left nothing alive in its wake. The string sang once. The arrow flew. It struck Nessus squarely in the back. The centaur let out a howl that was not quite human, not quite beast, a sound of betrayal, pain and rage all tangled together. He staggered forward, lost his footing, and collapsed onto the stones of the riverbank. Dark purple blood spilled from the wound, thick and unnatural, steaming as it mixed with the water. But Nessus did not die at once. The poison worked slowly, cruelly. As his strength drained away, as his limbs trembled and failed him, he turned his head toward Deianira. His eyes were no longer wild, they were calculating. With his final breaths, he leaned close enough that his words could not be overheard by gods or heroes, only by fear. "Take some of my blood," he whispered, his voice slick with pain and deception, "and smear it on Hercules' clothing. It is a love charm. It will keep his heart forever yours." Deianira trembled as she listened. She did not hear malice. She heard reassurance. She did not see a dying enemy. She saw a solution. Because beneath her love for Hercules lived a quieter emotion, one she had never spoken aloud. Fear. Fear that one day the hero admired by cities and kings, the man desired by gods and mortals alike, might turn away. Fear that strength like his could never truly belong to one woman. And so she believed Nessus. Not because she was foolish, but because she was human. She gathered the blood with shaking hands, unaware that what she held was not a charm of love, but a sentence written in venom. And far away, the river kept flowing silent, witness to the moment when jealousy, fear, and trust wove themselves together into a fate no hero could outrun. She caught Nessus's blood in a small cloth, never knowing that his blood was already mingled with Hydra's poison, never knowing she was holding fate itself in her hands. Years passed. Hercules continued to win victories. His name spread far and wide. Rumors reached Deianira as well. That Hercules had helped some princess in one kingdom, that some priestess in another city was grateful to him, that he had been invited to stay in a palace for too long. Nothing proved any of it was true. But Deianira had the heart of a human, not a god. And humans always know how to worry, how to fear losing what they love. One afternoon, Hercules returned in his familiar lion-skin cloak. Deianira looked at him with a flicker of unspoken fear in her eyes. She remembered Nessus's words, remembered the love charm, remembered the blood she had hidden away for so many years. And in that moment of weakness, not born of cruelty, but of fear, she made a choice that would echo louder than any curse. She wanted to keep Hercules' heart at any cost. With trembling hands, Deianira took a white tunic, simple, clean, untouched by war. She dabbed the centaur's blood onto the fabric, careful, almost reverent, as though performing a quiet ritual rather than sealing a fate. She wrapped the tunic tightly as one might protect something precious and sent it to her husband as a gift of love. She did not weep when she sent it. She did not sense doom. She only felt relief, the fragile relief of someone who believes they have finally secured what they fear to lose. That same morning, Hercules stood on a hilltop. The land stretched endlessly below him, forests, valleys, distant rivers catching the light. The wind threaded through his hair, cool and gentle, and the sky above him was wide and open, as if the world itself were making room for his presence. He held the tunic in his hands, white, unassuming, soft. He smiled, not the smile of a warrior victorious, but the quiet smile of a man thinking of home, of his wife, of the rare tenderness that still found him after a life soaked in blood and penance. This is from Deianira, he thought, and in that thought there was peace. He put it on, and at once fire erupted, not fire that could be seen, not flame that could be smothered or escaped. It was an invisible, venomous blaze, a living agony that burst from the cloth and surged into his skin. The Hydra's poison carried in Nessus's blood awoke. It did not burn like heat. It devoured like acid. It burrowed. Under the white fabric, Hercules' skin flushed red, then darker, then split open as if his flesh itself were trying to flee the pain. The tunic shrank and tightened, clinging to him like a second skin, no, like a parasite. He cried out. The sound rolled across the hills raw and shattered a sound no monster had ever forced from him. He clawed at the garment, trying to tear it away, but wherever his hands touched the fabric, fused deeper, ripping muscle from bone as it came away. Blood ran down his arms. The poison crawled through his veins, attacking him from within and without. This was not a battle. There was no enemy to strike, no strength to summon, no courage that could blunt the pain. The hero who had broken lions with his hands fell to his knees, overcome by a suffering no labor had prepared him for. And in that moment, as his body burned and failed him, Hercules understood the cruelest truth of all, that this pain had not come from hatred, not from war, but from love twisted by fear. The sky above remained bright. The wind still moved gently through the grass. And the world, indifferent, eternal, watched as its greatest hero began his final trial. Hercules screamed, but it was not pain alone that tore the sound from him. It was the understanding that Deianira had never meant for this to happen. He tried to tear the tunic off, but every time he grabbed it, chunks of flesh ripped from his body. All the labors, all the victories, all the strength he had forged across a lifetime were meaningless before Hydra's poison. He looked down at his hands, hands that had once crushed the Nemean lion's neck, once held Cerberus, once shouldered the sky in Atlas's place. Now they trembled, not from fear of death, but from love for his wife. Hercules knew he could not survive, but he did not want to die in spreading agony, did not want his body to be tormented by poison to the very last breath. And more than that, he did not want Deianira to carry this guilt forever. He sent a message, "I forgive you. Do not grieve. Do not blame yourself." Then Hercules climbed Mount Oeta, the highest peak in the region where clouds brushed the stone. He built his own funeral pyre from pine wood and lay down upon it. No one dared light the fire until a young man, Philoctetes, stepped forward. There was sorrow in his eyes, but they did not waver. Hercules looked at him and nodded. The flames leapt up, fire wrapped around his body, as if trying to burn away all the pain he had carried his whole life. The entire mountain glowed as though a new sun had risen behind the rocks. But Hercules' death was not the death of a mortal. As his body dissolved into flame, Zeus, watching from Olympus, looked down, and for the first time the supreme god wept for a child he had once neglected. Zeus brought Hercules' soul up to the heavens, not down to Hades, not into oblivion. Hera, the one who had hated him most, saw his soul, saw the pain, the atonement, the kindness, and the endurance of one who had passed through every trial. She stepped forward and laid a hand on Hercules' shoulder. "From this day on, I am no longer your enemy. You are no longer Zeus's illegitimate child. You are a god." Hercules became an immortal god dwelling on Olympus and married Hebe, the goddess of youth, Hera's own daughter. In the dim light of the night sky, people say, if a star seems to shine brighter than the others, that is Hercules, the only hero to be born twice, once from a mortal mother, and once from the very flames of fate.
Off.
When the flame went out, the sky opened. The fire on Mount Aweta rose like a small sun, then softened, dimmed, and melted into the dusk. Those who were there said that in the final moment of the fire's glow, there were no cries, no screams of pain, only silence. A silence so deep you could hear the wind sliding through every pine branch and the heartbeat of Greece slowing gently as if the land itself were watching its child depart. Hercules' mortal body was burning, but his soul was not. His soul grew lighter, peeling away from the wounded flesh, like a warrior removing his armor for the last time, like a bird slipping free from the cage of fate. And then the sky above him opened. Zeus looked down at the mountain, not with the eyes of the supreme god, but with the eyes of a father watching a child who had lived a lifetime of suffering. He lifted his hand, and from the peak of Olympus a column of light descended, not hot, not blinding, but gentle, like the first breath of dawn. Hercules' soul rose slowly through the clouds, through the pale blue sky, through the currents of wind that wrapped around him, as if saying farewell. Above the gods were waiting. Apollo, his eyes filled with pride. Athena nodding softly, acknowledging a fellow warrior. Hades solemn, yet carrying a rare respect. And Hera, who had filled Hercules' life with trials, who had sown his pain, his struggle, his loss. She stepped forward, no anger, no resentment, only the quiet understanding of someone who finally sees that the hero she once wanted to destroy had risen above all things and still kept a heart untouched by hatred. Hera extended her hand. Zeus placed his hand over hers. Together, they welcomed Hercules through the gates of Olympus. That moment is remembered as the apotheosis of Hercules. He was no longer a demigod, no longer mortal, no longer chained by madness or destiny. From that instant on, Hercules became an immortal god, radiant with courage and atonement. On Olympus, Hercules was given a seat among the gods, not for his strength, not for his 12 labors, but because he had endured every cruelty of fate, yet never lost his compassion. He was granted immortality, a new life, and was wed to Hebe, the goddess of youth, daughter of Hera. It was not compensation. It was a circle finally closed from hatred, to reconciliation from bondage, to freedom from pain, to peace. And even now people say Hercules is the only god who was born twice, once from his mortal mother, and once from the fire that touched destiny. When the Greeks told the story of Hercules, they were not merely telling a story about strength. They were telling a story about humanity, human weakness, mistakes rising again, and the power to turn suffering into light. Hercules made mistakes. He had moments of rage. He lost himself. He fell to his knees, but he never surrendered to fate. He dared to walk into the lion's den, the swamp of the Hydra, the house of the god of war, the land of the dead, not because he was invincible, but because he was brave. And bravery to the Greeks is not the absence of fear, but stepping forward, even when you know the path is filled with darkness. Hercules tells us something soft, human, and true. You do not need to be perfect to be the hero of your own life. You can make mistakes. You can be hurt. You can fall again and again, and still find a way to rise. Strength is not in your hands. It is in the way you stand up after the things that seem impossible to forgive. Hercules did not die like a hero falling on the battlefield. He died in pain. He died for love. He died because of a garment soaked in poison, the final gift of Deianira, given in fear, and returned as a sentence. As the flames consumed his mortal body, there were no screams, no desperate pleas, only the silence of a man who had walked the entire path of atonement. The 12 labors were complete. The monsters had fallen. But more important than all of that, the proud, untamed self had finally been undone. And in the moment when the body could no longer endure the pain, Zeus opened the final gate. Hercules was not saved from death. He was released from mortality. Apotheosis was not a reward. It was an acknowledgement that a human being, even one born of thunder, becomes truly immortal only when he dares to face his own guilt and does not run from it. The story of Hercules does not exist to glorify strength. It exists to warn against it. No labor is great enough to erase a crime. Only responsibility opens the way forward. And perhaps that is why, after thousands of years, Hercules has never left human memory. Not because he was the strongest, but because he was the most like us when he failed, when he regretted, and when he chose to keep walking even without the certainty of hope. If you are listening to this story tonight in a quiet place when the world has slowed down, leave a line for yourself where you are and what part of this story touched you the most. Or leave a comment to tell me which city you're listening from and what time it is there. And now let the fires of Olympus fade, let the gods fall silent, and let sleep arrive as softly as ash settling after the flames. Good night. And may you, like Hercules, find strength not to conquer the world, but to conquer yourself.